Oh, hello there. I was deeply absorbed in thought, thinking about this game I played. Blasphemous 2, have you heard of it? Quite an experience, if I do say so myself. Now that I am undead, I've had the time to play quite a few games. It looks like I did pick your interest. Perhaps you would want to hear more. Very well then, I'll give you a brief review. Blasphemous 1 took the world by storm. Not only is it one of the best 2D Souls-likes to be made to this day, but it was also a looker of a game, infusing its expertly crafted pixel art with grotesque imagery inspired by paintings from the Romanticism era. Blasphemous 2 has really big shoes to fill. Not only does the game have to live up to an amazing art direction, but it also needs to deliver when it comes to the difficulty and satisfying progression that the previous game had. After sinking roughly 30 hours into Blasphemous 2, I can safely say that I enjoyed it. But this praise doesn't come without some caveats. The first thing players will notice when playing Blasphemous 2 is just how much nicer everything looks. The game's budget seems to have gone up, and it's immediately reflected in every level and background. Calling the game gorgeous is an understatement. Blasphemous 2 replaces the rotoscoped pixel art cutscenes with full animation, in the same style that was used for Blasphemous 1's last update trailer, Wounds of Eventide. Even though these cutscenes don't share the game's pixel art style, they still blend in really nicely and are used effectively to accentuate certain story moments. Blasphemous 2 also has a lot of voiceover in Spanish, which I enjoyed a lot more than the English voice acting, despite having to rely on subtitles. I really wish there was a way to play the game in English with full Spanish voice acting, because it's superb. The English voice acting isn't necessarily bad, but it does feature some wacky pronunciations of Spanish words, like the goddess Anunciada, mispronouncing her own name when introducing herself.
Anunciada is my name, and I hail from the heavenly mountains on high.
In the previous game, the penitent one wielded his trusty sword called Mea Culpa, Latin for my guilt or my fault. In Blasphemous 2, the player is given 3 weapons to choose from. Each weapon has its own strengths and weaknesses, and can also serve to clear specific obstacles. The sword, Rego al Alba, is the balanced weapon of choice, and can burn down wooden barricades with a flaming downward swing. The mace, Veredicto, deals an absurd amount of damage, and can ring bells that make certain platforms materialize, while the dual rapiers, Sarmiento and Centella, hit very fast and can teleport the penitent one through mirrors. Unfortunately, none of the weapons seem to really catch up with the hammer. The hammer is obscenely strong, to the point where it can almost skip some boss phases, so you really wouldn't even have the need to switch if the game didn't require you to use other weapons to solve puzzles. I appreciate the expanded arsenal of the penitent one in this game, but I do feel like it lacks significance. The sword in the previous game was a physical embodiment of guilt and penitence, and while I do like the new weapons, they don't have a lot of meaning to them. In Blasphemous 2, the main enemy is the miracle, a supernatural force that manifests itself as a twisted form of religion. The miracle has touched upon almost every citizen we encounter, twisting people's faith and supplication into curses and deformities. Blasphemous 2 has no shortage of grotesque imagery, as it hits a very specific note, with all of its religious-inspired designs, managing to create some haunting sights, like the woman whose blood fills our healing vials, who progressively gets more flayed as we upgrade our health and healing. One thing that does bother me is how almost all of these fantastic designs have been reserved for the game's NPCs, and barely any for the bosses. Blasphemous 2's bosses are not badly designed, but a lot of them are lacking. I have a feeling that a lot of the game's bosses have been simplified due to feedback on the previous game, as some bosses were visually striking like Esposito, but felt terrible to fight against. I do wish that there was a middle ground that could be found, but maybe we got the best outcome. There's also the fact that the game's difficulty has been severely lowered. It honestly becomes hard to classify Blasphemous 2 as a Souls-like, due to how easy it was at points. The game is of above-average difficulty as far as Metroidvanias go, but I'm not sure how comfortable I am calling this a Souls-like anymore. Blasphemous 1 bordered on masochistic at times, but it always managed to keep you entertained, even if it was through rage sometimes. The previous game's areas really felt like a challenge to be conquered, whereas the areas in Blasphemous 2 can be breezed through without much thought. Despite lacking in difficulty, the game's areas are pretty fun to go through. Not only are they filled with secrets and platforming challenges, but they are also gorgeous to look at. A few areas on Blasphemous 2 just feel like the developers flexing their level-making skills, especially an area later in the game that has a mirror version of itself underwater. The game seamlessly lets you travel between both parts on one cohesive map made up of two inverted locations. As you encounter increasingly grotesque enemies and characters, Blasphemous 2's soundtrack remains in the background, a melancholic melody accentuating your pilgrimage, always present to set the tone of the game's beautiful stages. Going through the game's areas with the fantastic work of Carlos Viola playing in the background is an excellent experience, and I urge everyone to listen to the game's soundtrack, as it really is a unique work of art. Even though Blasphemous 2 doesn't exactly meet my own expectations as a Souls-like, I do have to give it props for being a fantastic Metroidvania. The game's progression is quite satisfying, and the game is completely free of padding or meandering, despite being 20 to 25 hours long. It could just be that I'm masochistic and want some of the unreasonable difficulty present in the previous game to return, though. Even if it doesn't scratch the itch the previous game placed in me, I do recommend Blasphemous 2, possibly more than the first one, as it's a very polished and enjoyable experience. Well, there you have it. Remember to like the video and subscribe so we can engage in more jolly reviewing in the future.